Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very special session for the 10th anniversary of International Jazz Day, a dialogue between Ms. Audrey Azoulay, the Director-General of UNESCO, and Mr. Herbie Hancock, a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Intercultural Dialogue. My name is Mika Shino, and I am the Director of International Jazz Day at the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, and it is a great pleasure to be able to moderate this talk. International Jazz Day is an international day declared by UNESCO in 2011 to highlight jazz and its diplomatic role of uniting people in all corners of the globe. It is celebrated each year on April 30th. UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador Herbie Hancock initiated International Jazz Day in 2010, and it has since mobilized people in 195 countries. From small grassroots performances to multi-venue concerts, events for International Jazz Day throughout the world are organized and led by community leaders, musicians, artists, students, and cultural activists, and embraced as a day to celebrate the potential of jazz to build peace. This year marks the 10th anniversary of International Jazz Day and gives rise to a special moment to reflect and seek insight from the past 10 years. It is now my honor to welcome the two discussants here with us today, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, the Director-General of UNESCO, and Mr. Herbie Hancock, the UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Intercultural Dialogue. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
A pleasure.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
So perhaps we can start by saying thank you for all that you've done for Jazz Day. It has really inspired people all over the world. And maybe we can start with a question, why is it important to celebrate Jazz Day? And how did the idea for International Jazz Day come about?
Well, Jazz Day began as a concept, just realizing where jazz was at the time that I was brought in as the Goodwill Ambassador for UNESCO. And at that particular time, which is 11 years ago, jazz had moved from being a music that was just from American culture to a music that was embraced, not just by listeners, but by musicians from all over the world who have put in their individual tones and colors from their own cultures and broadened the whole scope of what jazz is really about, the expression of jazz, you know, instead of just expressing what, using elements from American culture, it was expressing elements from cultures all over the world. So I felt like, because the expertise of jazz was not just confined to musicians in New York, you know, which, I mean, that was usually like the hub for any jazz musician. They had to go to New York in order to be able to really progress and be at the top of the heap as musicians playing jazz. But so many people were coming up from various countries throughout the world. And I know about that because the Institute, the Herbie Hancock Institute, which was the Thelonious Monk Institute, has concerts, competitions for various instruments. And in more recent years, so many winners were not Americans. You know, I remember when in the piano competition, Tigran Hamasyan from Armenia won. He was #1, but I could tell in the way he played the music, there were elements from his culture that were in his playing of jazz. It was intriguing. And I told him, you got to teach me how to do that. Afterwards, I told him that. And the guy who was second place was from Estonia. You know, when I started seeing, you know, people from various countries that were winning, I realized that jazz was no longer just the music that was expressed through American culture. It was music that was expressed through cultures from from throughout the world. That makes it a global music. And I felt it was time for America to present jazz to the world so that the world owns it and not just America. So it's our gift to the rest of the world so that jazz is a global music and not just an American music. That seemed to fit in with what UNESCO is really about. That was my feeling. And would you say that's true, Audrey?
I mean, I think it's first, thank you again. 11 years ago, you had this brilliant and still very productive idea to empower, I mean, to use the power of jazz, its freedom, its creativity, its capability to create bonds and to integrate all those different influences. You mentioned Armenia or Estonia, and I mean, it's something that we've seen. I mean, I was thinking of preparing for this discussion. I was thinking of Manu Dibango, who was also one of your colleagues, ambassador, Goodwill Ambassador to UNESCO, fantastic musician, and who blended in the sounds of Congolese rumba to jazz and created something else, always expanding actually the family of jazz. I was recently in Ethiopia. I mean, in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian jazz is something very strong, very alive still. And so these different links, or with Cabo Verde, with La Morna, there are links that have been created. And this is exceptional. I mean, in all the different arts, not many music or not many arts have this capability to integrate the different influence and create something unique. And this is actually, you have touched upon what UNESCO should be. What was the ideal of those who created UNESCO after Second World War, with this idea that, okay, we needed in 1945, we needed economic reconstruction, we needed infrastructures, we needed trade agreements, but the real links that would preserve peace would be between people, touching their heart, touching their identity, and this would be much stronger if made through culture, through education, through science. And actually with jazz, there's also an issue, and with International Jazz Day, there's also education. There's also this thing, culture, education, at the same time, knowledge and respect of different identities, different influence, and all dialoguing each time in a unique way into jazz. So it's really, I mean, it really embodies, it really gives a reality to this ideal ambition of UNESCO. So again, for that, thank you, Herbie. and I'm really happy that at the time you made this proposition. It was accepted by more than 190 member states, and it is so alive today, even during a pandemic, as we've lived last year and as we will live today. Well,
you know, I was surprised at that time how quickly it was accepted by all the member states of UNESCO. You know, I think Mika told me it was just a matter of days, and maybe a day or two, and all 195 countries said yes. That was like a wow moment for me.
But it's also, it shows the power of artists. There is something very different than usual diplomacy. I mean, there is something people, people trust you because they admire you, they trust you, and they know, I mean, how could I say that? They know how sincere this kind of proposition is. It's very different than the traditional multilateral dialogues or initiatives. And that's what also makes UNESCO so special, because it deals with a substance, with something which is culture, which is education, which is science, I mean, science, for instance, is a universal as well dialogue Scientists from all over the world work together, no borders. It's the same with literature. So there is something very special in the mandate of UNESCO, which permits that. And it's also, I mean, you have to admit, it's also because of you, because of this proposition that you made.
Well, thank you very much. I also had no idea that it would grow in these 2 years so much. You know, we had no idea whether it was going to grow at all, but somehow it struck a chord with people throughout the world, and now there's millions and billions of people that are actually touched by International Jazz Day. Some of the things that also really surprised me, and I have to thank Mika for pointing this out to me, that some countries, when they were asked what could they do to celebrate International Jazz Day, we went to tried to go to every country in the world. And many of those countries were considered conflict countries. And I remember Mika showing me, she was so excited. She had tears in her eyes. And oh, I have to explain, Mika used to be with UNESCO. She was the one that introduced me to UNESCO. And I guess made the argument for hoping that the UNESCO would accept me as a Goodwill Ambassador. And it was her idea. It's her fault. Anyway, Mika showed me a letter from the Central African Republic. This was about 7 years ago, I believe. And from a gentleman, I think his name is Pierre, is that right, Mika? And he was so excited that he was asked to be on the same level as France or the United States or Italy, and he wasn't being called upon out of pity, because he said anybody that's ever said anything about Central African Republic at that time came from a standpoint of pity and being sorry for their difficulties. We were asking about their culture. That reached right to his heart and said it brought him to tears, that there was no sense of them being less than any of the major countries in the world.
That's very important. It's very important because you recognize through this, you recognize the dignity, the equal dignity, the importance of each. It's not the countries; it's more the people, their culture, their history, where they come from, and for that there is no hierarchy. And that's also one of the core message of UNESCO. All the work we do on cultural diversity or protection of intangible heritage, not only the sites, but also this intangible culture that we receive from history, and for which there is no, it's not a question of politics, it's not a question of borders. Very often it crosses borders, by the way, and it's really, and it touches the people. It touches the people directly in their heart, and that's so important, so important.
Exactly. It's because we're not looking for the traditional leaders of the countries who may be political leaders or leaders in high level, what are considered high level arenas. But this is people to people. Musicians, especially jazz musicians, I mean, it's not even the classical musicians that would be considered sort of, or had been considered the high level. I think it's changing now that jazz is now up on you know, up on that level. But the main point is that it really comes from the hearts of the people. The culture is built by the people.
Mm. And
So
each
it's an
one brings
expression of
something.
that culture. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have a question, if you allow. I have a question regarding, I mean, those 10, 11 years of what would be, maybe, I guess all editions were spectacular and special in their own ways, but is there a particular moment or edition that you have in mind?
Well, I remember certain ones, and that certain years that International Jazz Day stands out. Of course, the first year when we were able to have the main event at the United Nations in New York. Actually, United Nations exists on the land of New York, but that particular land is a global land. You know, so that it's like that's the world, represents the world. And we were in the main hall that, you know, many people have seen on television, but they've never heard jazz from that venue.
You know, some ambassadors that were in the UN at that time that I meet still have, you know, stars in their eyes, like it was the best moment of the United Nations. Who would have imagined to have jazz, such an incredible jazz concert within the premises of the UN headquarters in New York?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. And one thing that stands out for me about that particular time, I mean, especially that being the first, I remember we all took a break to get something to eat. And we were in a restaurant area, not a restaurant, but a dining area downstairs. And I think maybe we had finished half of the presentation. And there was a certain feeling there that now I've experienced every year, all 10 years. It really felt like a sense of the world being together as one unit. And I had that feeling. I asked someone, I think he was an ambassador from somewhere, do you have that same feeling I do? He said, absolutely. He said, this is really unusual, but it's really beautiful.
Because usually in multilateral organizations like the UN, or everybody is here, but defends a different point of view or has its agenda. And it's very exceptional to be able to unite completely in something that is so powerful. So really, right. I think it was an exceptional in the history of the UN.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you explained it that way, because that really completely answers that question I had in mind, which was, how was that happening? But you explained it so eloquently. There were some other highlights that I love too, when we were in Osaka, Japan, and we had an experience that was really a first for us again. And that was that we had a presentation from the International Space Station. That
I didn't know that.
blew everybody's mind, because here the astronauts were standing there, and when they passed the microphone from one to the other, it floated in the air to the next person who grabbed it. So they knew it wasn't just,
it was real.
It was real, right? Exactly.
It was real, no gravity. Wow. You know that feeling already in jazz, you know, about the zero gravity feeling. Right. But then you could see it really. I didn't know that episode. Yeah, excellent.
That phrase, you know, no gravity phrase. That's a phrase that was kind of created by Wayne Shorter. Great
Voilà.
saxophonist that we have, you know, our best,
Mm.
and great, amazing composer, you know. There was another event that also sticks out in my mind, and that was from Antarctica. We had a presentation from one of the workers there in Antarctica who had vibraphones, and he was playing this with 4 mallets. A real professional musician, although that's not his profession. And I was shocked that this guy was really, really good. You know, that was amazing. Anyway, those are some of the things that stick out in my mind. Russia, when we were in Russia.
I think Igor Buttman will participate in this edition again. I remember how he hosted, and there was so much warmth and friendship and artistic connection,
right.
which is in this context, in this global picture that we know is very fragmented otherwise.
Right.
There we have something exceptional.
Absolutely. I mean, that is what gives International Jazz Day such meaning. Those kinds of events. Also, when we had International Jazz Day in Cuba.
Right? It must have been incredible.
It really was.
I wish I were there. It must have been amazing.
Yeah, and they put it on. There was a huge screen they had outside the venue, so that anybody on the street could see a gigantic screen of all the music that was being played, and everybody was completely transfixed by the whole program.
And culture is so much part of their life in Cuba. Music, but not only music, dance. It's so much part, even cinema, of their culture, of their life, that it must have been fantastic to have it in Cuba. I think really it shows this power of jazz, and I wonder also what you felt about last edition, which was online. So it's different relationship. It's different relationship with the artist. I don't know what feelings you had about this very special moment we're living in, and International Jazz Day, mostly online during this time.
Well, of course, we had to reinvent International Jazz Day in a way and come up with some new solutions. That's the good news, because
there are solutions.
Yeah, we had to create them.
Yes.
You know, so that in itself is exactly what jazz is about, creating something new.
Each time.
Not only that, you know, we always think of jazz as being a music that's improvised. Isn't life that way? We never know what's going to happen in the next moment. So human beings are constantly improvising. We improvise when we talk. Because how could you have a conversation if you didn't improvise? Right? So every human being is an improviser. It's part of life. And that's the beauty of jazz. It's so much an example of exactly what life is about. But the ethics of jazz are top level, superior. Because in life, very often people are very judgmental. Jazz is about not being judgmental. If you stop to think about whether you liked or didn't like what the guitar player played, you would miss the next moment.
You feel
if the music would stop, right?
Yeah.
So what we do, whatever happens, the ethos of jazz is about immediately responding to it in a positive way, looking at it as truth coming from this person, and how can we turn this truth into an important part of the direction of the music.
I like this idea and said like that because I had not thought about the ethos of jazz in this way. And here again, I see the connection to UNESCO's ideal or ambitions, because it's, in a sense, everything that we do is based on the idea that we recognize the other, we respect the other, we see the other in its difference, and it's what we have in common as well. But we respect this difference and this other person, and this is exactly probably how it works in a quartet or in a quintet or when you play jazz, and this is probably what we as an audience are privileged to feel when we see you on stage or when we listen to your music. It's beautiful, this idea of ethos of jazz. And if I may comment as well on something else you said during these pandemics we had to create new solutions, and it has very positive aspects. I think it's true as well for institutions like multilateral institutions. There's a bit of a test in this unexpected that happened. Maybe it was not that unexpected, but at least it was, for most of us, it was unexpected. Yes. And then we had to reinvent some of the way we work or some of the things we do differently because the needs were not the same for distance remote education, for open sciences, for ethical issues linked to, I remember we had discussed that it's ethical issues linked to digital innovation or artificial intelligence or all those devices that are now playing a more and more important role in our lives. So, and we had to reinvent ourselves because everything was different for the last month. So it has also, it has positive sides as well, positive aspects as well.
I was just thinking about one thing, and this pertains to the S part of UNESCO, science. I'll never forget walking out, and I live in Los Angeles, right? Walking out, I was going for a walk with a friend of mine. We looked up at the sky. It looked so clear and so clean. There was no traffic anywhere. And the air had a smell that, again, was so clean that it was a smell that I had forgotten about how good the air could smell. And I realized because for a moment, we got a glimpse of what could happen if we do something about climate change. If we fix the mistakes that we made, big mistakes for years. And that made me realize so clearly, we've got a big job to do.
But it's also, I think many people, because many things stopped in terms of economic activities or decreased, many people felt a need for more nature in their life. And there was also a healing power of nature, I think, in all those difficulties and isolation. They also see maybe nature a bit differently. And I hope some of that stays when the pandemic is over, so that we really change some of our relationship with the living planet, our relationship with the diversity of also the fabric of Earth and nature, and we know what we should do. Science has given us the tools, the solutions. It's just that maybe we didn't have enough will or urgent thing, but maybe it's changing with generations, and then even our generations will see things differently. I hope.
We just have to decide. It's up to us. The other thing I was thinking about, you know who are some of the best musicians in the world? The birds.
Birds, yes.
we could hear more of their song because it wasn't drowned out by cars and trucks and machines, so many machines. And that was very clear to me too.
There is this relationship between, nature and culture. The fact also so many cultures have developed because they were in such a different environment here in this or that part of the world. All this is linked. We cannot divide them. And also, more sadly for me, I realized also that even with less traffic in Paris, I couldn't hear that many birds because they had left the city and they were not returning. And this is a change from the moment when I was a young kid in Paris. It's also true with insects. We don't see them, we don't miss them, but actually they are no longer around, or only those we don't want to have around. So we also realize more of those changes that we can see during a lifetime, and it's still time to do something about it. Right.
Thank you so much. I have to cut this. I know this is such a beautiful discussion, and I wish we could have all the time in the world, but I know that there has to be
you're right.
time constraint. There's a time constraint that you have. So thank you so much for this. It was such a special moment. And it was wonderful to be able to hear the connection between jazz and the mission of UNESCO and how we could further intercultural dialogue. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mika, and thank you very much, Herbie. It's always an honor, a pleasure to listen to you. Usually it's your music. Now I have the pleasure to listen to you. So I really am truly honored, and thank you again for all the energy, the passion you put in International Jazz Day.
And thank you so much, Audrey, for everything you're doing in UNESCO for the world.
Merci.
We need UNESCO.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Herbie. Merci beaucoup. À bientôt, j'espère. Au revoir.
Bonsoir.
Au revoir.